The engineers building the first Apple computer were told to create the impossible. And they did. Repeatedly. What if the greatest tool a leader has isn't a business plan, a spreadsheet, or an MBA? What if it's the sheer, unadulterated force of their own belief? Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, possessed a legendary, almost mythical power to bend the world to his will. His long-suffering but brilliant colleagues had a name for it. They borrowed it from an episode of Star Trek. They called it the reality distortion field. We remember Steve Jobs as a visionary. The man in the black turtleneck who stood on a stage and gave us the Macintosh, the iPod, the iPhone, products that didn't just create industries, but changed the very fabric of modern life. But behind these iconic products, there is a legend. A legend whispered by the people who worked in the trenches with him. A story of a power so intense, so charismatic, that it could convince the most brilliant engineers in the world that the laws of physics were merely suggestions. A power that could make them believe the impossible was not only possible, but that it was their job to deliver it by next Tuesday. So what exactly was this reality distortion field? Was it just a myth? A simple euphemism for being an incredibly demanding and difficult boss? Or was it a tangible, powerful, and replicable leadership technique? How did it work? What were its psychological roots? And was it the ultimate tool for innovation, or a dangerous path to toxicity and burnout? That's the question we're answering today. The term reality distortion field was first used in the early 1980s by the engineers on the original Macintosh team. They were working under immense pressure to create a computer for the rest of us, and they were constantly hitting walls that seemed technically insurmountable. The RDF was their way of describing what happened when Steve Jobs entered the room. One of the most famous stories comes from Larry Kenyon, an engineer working on the Mac's operating system. Jobs stormed into his cubicle one day, complaining that the computer took too long to boot up. Kenyon began to explain, from a technical standpoint, why it was impossible to make it any faster. Jobs cut him off. He walked Kenyon over to a whiteboard and asked, if it would save a person's life, could you find a way to shave 10 seconds off the boot time? Kenyon, a bit taken aback, admitted that, yes, he probably could. Jobs then sketched out a quick calculation. If 5 million people were going to use the Mac, and it took them an extra 10 seconds to turn it on every day, that adds up to roughly 300 million hours over a year. That's the equivalent of at least 100 human lifetimes. Jobs looked at Kenyon and told him that shaving 10 seconds off the boot time would be like saving a dozen lives. A week later, Kenyon had the machine booting up 28 seconds faster. Decades later, the story repeated itself with the first iPhone. Jobs was adamant that the screen be made of an unscratchable glass, not plastic. He met with the CEO of Corning, who told him that while they had a strengthened Gorilla Glass in development, it was impossible to manufacture it at scale in just 6 months. Jobs was unfazed. He simply stared at the CEO and said, "Don't be afraid. You can do it." Under the spell of the RDF, Corning converted an entire factory in Kentucky to produce the glass. They delivered it ahead of schedule, and it has been used on virtually every smartphone since. The reality distortion field wasn't magic. It was a potent and repeatable combination of several powerful psychological and rhetorical techniques that Jobs had mastered. It stood on 4 main pillars. First, unshakable conviction. Jobs believed in his vision with the fervor of a religious zealot. When he said something was possible, he believed it down to his atoms. This absolute certainty was infectious. It allowed others to suspend their own doubt and skepticism, even for a moment. Second, appealing to a higher purpose. Jobs rarely framed a challenge in terms of market share or profit margins. He framed it as part of a noble, world-changing quest. The Macintosh wasn't a product. It was a tool to empower individuals against corporate monoliths. Saving 10 seconds of boot time wasn't about efficiency. It was about saving human lives. This gave the grueling work a profound sense of meaning. Third, intense, personalized focus. When Steve Jobs turned his attention to you, it was described as a laser beam of charisma. He would look you in the eye and make you feel like you were the most important person in the world, and that your specific task was the single most critical element to the success of his grand mission. This intense validation was intoxicating. And fourth, a binary worldview. In Steve Jobs' universe, there was no middle ground. Things were never just good or okay. They were either insanely great or they were total garbage. This created immense pressure on his teams. No one wanted their work to be labeled garbage, so they would push themselves to extraordinary lengths to land on the insanely great side of the equation. For every story of an engineering breakthrough achieved under the RDF, there is a story of the immense human cost. The reality distortion field was a double-edged sword. The same field that inspired people to achieve the impossible could also be used to bully, manipulate, and belittle them. The pressure was constant and immense. Employees at Apple worked grueling, 100-hour weeks, often to the point of complete physical and mental exhaustion, driven by a deep-seated fear of Jobs' legendary temper. The RDF wasn't just used to distort the future, it was also used to distort the past and present. Jobs would famously hear an idea from an employee, call it stupid, and then, a week later, present that exact same idea in a meeting as his own brilliant insight, genuinely believing he had come up with it himself. He would use the field to set deadlines that weren't just ambitious, they were disconnected from reality. While this sometimes led to miraculous breakthroughs, it just as often led to flawed products being rushed out the door and, more importantly, to the complete burnout of his most loyal and talented people. The reality distortion field created a cult of personality. It built a culture where one person's vision was absolute. And while this can be incredibly effective when that one person is a once-in-a-generation genius like Steve Jobs, it can also stifle dissent, discourage collaboration, and create a dangerous, unhealthy dependency on a single leader. Let's connect the dots. The reality distortion field was a real, observable phenomenon. It was born during the creation of the original Macintosh and was a core part of Jobs' leadership style throughout his entire career. It worked through a powerful combination of his unshakable conviction, his ability to frame work as a higher purpose, his intense personal charisma, and his brutally binary worldview. But this incredible tool for motivation had a significant dark side, often creating a toxic work culture defined by fear, manipulation, and burnout. And that is the secret. The reality distortion field wasn't just about motivation or lying. It was about creating a new, shared reality. Steve Jobs' primary function as a leader was to construct an alternate universe. A universe where the normal rules of engineering, business, and human limitation were temporarily suspended. By sheer force of will, he would invite his teams to step inside this bubble with him. And inside that bubble, impossible things suddenly became possible, because the very definition of impossible had ceased to exist. It was a leadership tool for creating a temporary state of collective faith, where the only thing that mattered was achieving the vision. If this deep dive has distorted your reality in a good way, help us bend the algorithm to our will by hitting the like button and subscribing. The reality distortion field is the ultimate high-risk, high-reward leadership strategy. Its brilliance lies in the understanding that a leader's most profound impact often comes from managing the beliefs, the energy, and the spirit of their team. When aimed at a truly worthy goal, it can empower ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. But its danger is that, without a strong ethical foundation and a deep respect for people, it can easily curdle into a form of tyranny and manipulation. The broader business principle here is a masterclass in the power of visionary leadership. Most managers are paid to manage and optimize the present. Visionary leaders are tasked with creating the future. The reality distortion field is an extreme and potent example of this. It is the act of creating a vision so clear, so compelling, and so detailed that it begins to feel more real than the present-day reality of obstacles and constraints. The lesson is that a leader's job isn't just to manage what is. It is to paint a vivid picture of what could be, and to inspire people to bridge that gap, no matter how impossible it may seem. If you learn something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?